There's this silly impression by junior designers that the more research elements and research stuff they have in their portfolio and in their case study, the better off they will be. After all, design has to be based on research in order to make sense, right? Yes, that is true, but it is true for real products, not for made up stuff for your portfolio. Here's my talk with Ana Santos, a senior designer, researcher, and mentor. We will talk about what aspects of your portfolio you should truly focus on to maximize your chances, what kinds of research should you even put in that portfolio, how to write about your research, how to talk about your failures, and most of all, how much research is too much research, and what's the just right amount. Let's dive in. Okay, welcome. The idea for this talk is to cover something that's been troubling many junior designers for a long time, because there have been talks that UI is possibly the easiest and fastest route to the industry, but then all the people that are very research oriented protest that, saying that junior designers need to be researchers from the very beginning, even though they don't really have much knowledge or even possibility to do proper research. So first of all, what's your thought on that UI versus research debate that we're having?
Yeah, it's an interesting debate. So I always felt that UI is kind of part of the whole process. So you have to have something, in this case, the interface that users are able to interact with. So I always felt user interface design, being able how to actually design an interface is an essential skill. So that's a debate that I know it's ongoing, but for me, it's kind of everything is connected. So yeah.
Okay, so let's say we have a UX designer. What do you think that title would mean for a junior person? Because it says designer, but then at the same time, many people kind of associate the word designer more with researcher than the actual designer. So there's this kind of gap where we say designer, but we think it's mostly research and then maybe some wireframes and that's it. So what is a junior UX designer supposed to be, or what it is?
Great question. I do think a UX designer is more of a generalist. So I do understand that some people, when they think about UX, they think about everything before the actually high fidelity. And that includes information architecture and structure and wireframing. Maybe not as much research in the pure sense, but the way things are structured, I see that a lot. And I don't think it can be a misconception going into the industry, because most UX designer roles are a bit more generalist, and these type of generalist roles, they will require you to actually be involved in every step of the process. And that includes coming up with an interface that is going to be high fidelity. So summing up, short answer, yes, I do think you need to know how to design. And it's kind of in the name. I get some people telling me, okay, but I want to be a UX designer. Do I need to design? Do I need to be good at design? And I'm like, it's in the name. Yeah, you need to design. Short answer. Yeah.
Okay, so should there be maybe like a more clearer division between like a researcher and designer in the industry? And then designer would be the person that knows a little bit of research, but mostly is focused on design. And then researcher is the person who does most of the research and knows enough design to talk to the designer and have a nice collaboration.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah. I think in some companies, and it depends a bit on the UX maturity, I think we have that. So we have people who are dedicated mostly to UX research, and others are mostly dedicated to the design, UI design in this case. But I think there's still some, I would say, in between, which is people who are probably not as interested in the actually research foundations or generative research, but they are more interested how things are structured, how things are laid out. And I think that's when it comes to information architecture, wireframes, which you see it more often in more complex products. And not every type of product is going to have someone dedicated for every single of these functions, especially in companies that are not as UX mature. And I think that can be something to expect, a wrong expectation that you think you're going to be specialized in just one thing, but then you get into the role and you actually need to still do a little bit of everything. So I think, yes, you should have a UX researcher, definitely. But UX designers should also be involved in most of the things. They are just not should be expected to be the expert or master every single thing, because I think that's what leads to many of these misconceptions in the end as well.
Okay, so basically, when it comes to research, how much research should a junior entering the industry actually know? Because there's this whole thing about their portfolios looking like a little bit boring term papers, ticking the boxes like, customer journey, empathy map, persona, boom, 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 ticking the boxes. And then it becomes like a very long thing. Then when you put it next to other case studies from other juniors, and it really doesn't even matter if they finished the Google course or IDF or anything, they all look generic and exactly the same. And the idea was to maybe show like, okay, that they have this whole design thinking process and they understand the importance of research. But like, is it really that necessary for juniors to kind of check the boxes and really focus so strongly on research, even though that research is not really real research? Because they didn't really, like, in most cases they don't research actual users, so it's like a pretend research. And even if they do, there's like an n value of like 5 people or 3 people or asking your mom. So basically, is it like just to kind of show, okay, I can do it, but it's really not research, right?
I know what you mean. Well, I have some mixed feelings about this. I think one good point is that in these courses, most of these courses, they don't really teach you how to do research. They teach you kind of a shortcut to research, which I think it ends up being more harmful. I think it would have been more useful if they said, hey, you don't need to know everything about research, but this is what we have in terms of research. This is the types of research. This is qualitative research. This is quantitative research. How do you know if you have enough people? How can you target? Having a general idea, not necessarily having to do. Because most of the time what I see is, okay, let's do research. You go out in the field, interview random people, and that's it. That's research for you. And then you get this misconception. This is what research is. And then when you get into an actual job and you need to collaborate with UX researchers, people have foundations, even in social sciences, and they have actually research foundations. And you're not going to be able to collaborate as efficiently. So I'm all for being open to everything. I hate gatekeeping and all of that, but I do think it's important that we actually teach them, hey, you don't need to know everything, and that's okay. And you don't need to show in your portfolio like this whole amount of research. It's more about, do you understand? So I think a case study is way richer. For example, if you show me, hey, I got this research, I got this from the brief, someone else gave me this research, I collaborated with someone else, and now I am taking into account this research and I'm going to continue and actually work on my product. Obviously, I'm talking more about generative research. There are other types of research that I think you should do as a designer, which I'm talking usability testing and evaluative research, definitely. But I'm talking mostly about the discovery phase, and we know that people specialize to do that. So why trying to do everything? For me, when I look at the portfolio and I see, certain inconsistencies or certain checklists, like this is a persona, but there's no research or there's no reason for that persona to exist. I rather you tell me I collaborated with someone else, they gave me this research and I used it, so I considered. So it tells me you can understand the process, and you don't need to master everything, basically.
Right, but is it even possible for a complete junior with no foot in the industry whatsoever to be able to prepare a case study that has research that can be like truly relevant and also kind of, I don't know, eye-opening for, let's say, you as a recruiter, for example? You're looking at a study and then you see, oh, this is amazing research done by a junior with no resources, no actual users. Is it even possible to provide something like that as a junior? Not knowing what you do, having a little bit of knowledge from a course.
Not with a fictional project. I think in general you can't do it, because even the fictional project itself is going to be hypothetical. So you don't have real users. You can't really, how can you calculate even a statistically significant sample? You don't have users, you don't have a product. So it's very difficult. I do think, though, if you wanted to go through the research route and if you really wanted to focus just on research, but that's not going to be a UX designer role. If you want to go for UX research role, I think there are ways to show that you can do research. There are ways to integrate research in the process and show different ways how you would do it. So obviously you're not going to have the right sample, but showing that you're able to do it and actually show the reasoning behind that. But that's actually something else. I think in a UX design portfolio, first you need to focus as well on the outcome, which I don't see enough. I see very long case studies, but most of the time I don't see what is the final product, how all of these influence the final product. How does the interface look like? And that's the first thing people are going to see. They're going to want to see does the interface look like? And that's the reality. So if we are talking about UX designer generalist, if we're not talking about very specific cases of UX research, definitely I would just focus on the outcome, show me the outcome, and then explain me how you got here, but not necessarily trying to master everything that you are not able to in this case. Yeah,
because I have this metaphor of something that I call the UI sandwich. So basically, you place some nice final high fidelity on top. Then you kind of explain what the problem was and then how you go about fixing it. And then you kind of wrap it up with some more beautiful UI shots and possibly actually like a grid of screens, if possible, to show that you've done more than one, to have like, a lot of different things actually designed. And kind of that wraps up the little sort of TLDR semi-boring part in the middle, in between the nice visuals, which makes it easier for juniors to hook people, basically. So people looking at it, nice visuals, then there's some reading, okay, there's some thought process, there are some questions, there's some idea that they have about how to proceed with this, and then it ends with this high fidelity. So this, I believe, is really important because a lot of those case studies are simply boring because they're lacking that kind of visual hook completely, and they're more focused on being like a final master's term paper, thinking that the actual UX work is going to look like that it's like you'll be writing case studies full of graphs, charts, and analysis, and basically nothing else. But it's really hard to attract recruiters to case studies like that, or is it not?
I agree. I mean, from my experience, of course, it also depends a bit on your role. For example, I know, in the context I'm working now, we would probably look a bit more beyond the visuals. But I think most roles, and especially junior roles, UX, more generalist roles, they would look at your visuals first, because that's kind of what tells me, yes, you can design and you actually understand how an interface works. And it's important as well. It's important that you're able to design in a way that visually, let's say, makes sense, and it's a skill that's part of a design toolkit. I mean, I started as a visual designer. For me, I can't imagine what it is to not design. So it is essential. I think when you get into UX design, the first thing someone should tell you is, do you like to design? Do you actually to actual design? Because this is what you're going for. Many times starting a bootcamp, and I mentor for different bootcamps, some students ask me, do I really need to know how to design? Do I need, I don't really like Figma or Adobe or whatever tool. Do I really need to use it? I just want to do research. But it's like, these courses don't really teach you research, because the purpose there is actually teach you the overall process so you can become a designer. So if you want to become a designer, you really need to know how to design, bottom line.
Yeah, so this is also something that I've been saying for a while, that designers should design research and kind of not really try to mix it up into like very weird roles sometimes. But okay, so is it possible, let's say somebody really wants to become a researcher, but of course they haven't worked anywhere yet. So is it possible for them to create a nice couple of case studies of different sort of research approaches? Obviously not real research, because they don't have any real users or any real products. But okay, let's say they actually do a very good job of explaining that they understand the process. They know how to ask the right questions. They know how to focus on the right things. And then you hire that person as the researcher at the company. Would you give them right at the start, would you put them in an important product to do research on it?
Absolutely not. The big problem as well is in the industry, right? With the industry, we don't hire enough researchers. So we usually hire more designers and even more developers. And then researchers sometimes are kind of at the bottom of the expectations. So many companies don't even have dedicated researchers. So the designers do a bit of everything, but they don't really do anything. We go back to them mastering everything. But when a company employs actually dedicated researchers, and you want to bring someone who already has some knowledge, because you don't want to bring a solo UX researcher and they are still junior, because for them it's also going to be difficult because they don't have the foundations. They're going to struggle. They don't have anyone to teach them. So I would say in that case, not really. If you are a junior researcher, you should really be looking at mature companies that actually already have a research team, so you can learn from other researchers. And that's the type of thing you should expect. So you should actually look for junior UX research roles. So being a solo UX researcher is much more difficult. And I think in general, it's much easier, this is completely subjective, but from my experience, it's much easier to get a generalist role, like a UX designer generalist role. And that's how I started as well. You can later specialize. Do you want to specialize in research? Do you want to specialize in visual design? That's certainly that option. We don't need to be good at everything. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Well, definitely. But then, so possibly when you do UI first, let's say, and then you actually get the job, there is a much bigger chance that you'll get to work on the real product much faster. Probably not on the whole product, obviously, but you might get a couple of screens to tweak or maybe prepare different versions of them almost right away if you have those UI skills. But then with research, it's a lot tougher because you need to kind of get into the flow of how the company works, how they do research, which might be a little bit different than what the course said the research is done. I see it with us because we do still quite a lot of client projects, and we only do a couple of research types only, like 99% of the time. I think over 500 projects, we've done personas once or twice because the client wanted the full process and wanted to pay for it. But that was just because they wanted it, not because it was really necessary. So basically, if you know UI at least enough to get your foot through the door, then you can actually be at the company and then think what you want to do. So whether you want to go more into the research, more into being like a full generalist, or stay with the UI, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely think it opens you a lot of opportunities being good at visual design. And like you said in that example, with that example you gave about the, being able to do research, like just putting some deliverables out there, like personas, it's going to be incredibly frustrated for juniors because they learn in the course, personas are, they might work, but many times they won't work because in the end it's just a deliverable, right? And if you have that specific step-by-step process, it's going to be very difficult for you. It's going to be frustrating. So I think you do gain a lot from being working in a team. And if you can start your path, in a way that you understand the process, because you also need to do it. I also meet people on the opposite end, like people who come from academic backgrounds. They know a lot about research, but they also need to integrate themselves into the whole agile and fast-paced, design process. So it's also a process. So, there are different paths. If you are getting started in design right now, I think it makes total sense. Focus on the design, know how to design interfaces, start there. I think that's the easiest path, what I've seen. So why not?
Okay, so how much research should a person, let's say, that now understands that they need to focus on UI and their case study probably should be mostly UI, but how much research do you think they should show in that case study and what kinds, like competitive analysis or something like that, maybe?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it depends as well on the type of project. So usually everyone has a kind of fictional project that starts from scratch. And when they start from scratch, obviously it's a bit more difficult because they are trying to do all kinds of things in a fictional product that doesn't exist. What I usually recommend is, you can have your ideal process project, but just have one of those, no more. So you have a long, project that is kind of my process page or my approach page. And then you can put the whole process there, everything that you were taught in theory, but you also need to highlight some actual more, I wouldn't say realistic, but, for example, take a brief of something that already exists and, try to solve that problem, like something that exists already. You have some websites give you some briefs or, try to collaborate nonprofits, something that actually gives you something more realistic, because you can't just have projects that they start, from scratch. Here's my idea, here's my problem, here's how I solved, here's my persona, So it's always the same way. You really need to diversify your portfolio. So answering your question, how much research or how much, it really depends on the project. For your fictional, main project, feel free to explore the process and tell people, hey, this is the process, this is how it works. But really highlight case studies that show that you're able to take something that already exists, like an existing product or, something that you redesign. Sometimes even redesigning something, of course, you need to be aware that you don't know the audience and you don't know the product. We joke about the thousands of Spotify redesigns, but this is what I think. You can't just have every time you are just reinventing the wheel. We're not designing startups here. We're not starting businesses from scratch. We are actually solving something in an existing product. So
yeah, and with portfolio projects, you can't really solve a problem. And even if you go through the process showing that you did some research and then problem solved, it's only a thesis. So you kind of are saying that you solved the problem, but before you actually test it on people, then you don't really know. Maybe it actually got worse with those proposed changes.
yeah.
So but if we were to kind of figure out like a short list of typical portfolio projects starting from scratch, research key points. And I know it also is like a very standardizing and checklisty, but like if you were to create like a checklist of 3 types of research, and then let's say that most of the focus should be on the actual design part, but what kinds of research should be like necessary for it to show that that person has enough critical thinking, not to be a researcher, just to be a designer? Because obviously personas are not really that great in terms of showing anything, because it's mostly a template that everybody abuses. But maybe there are some types of research that are worth doing just to show that you understand how it works.
Yeah, definitely. I think for designers, what I'm looking for mostly is designers who can do evaluative research. So that is everything that has to do with pretty much the validation of the solution. So if we think about the typical design process, that you start on a problem space and then you move towards a potential solution. And, I'm talking about solution in general. It can be something from scratch, like the typical bootcamp project, or it can be an existing product, but there was a problem, whatever it was, and you solved it. So I want to think that, the mindset is there. So you can actually think in a problem-centered way. But I don't necessarily, need you to show me you did generative research, explore the space, did all of, those in-depth interviews, personas, because, that might not be something that you're going to be doing a lot daily if you are just a designer. But I want really to see lots of evaluative research. Evaluative research, I'm referring to usability testing, concept testing, A/B testing. Even if you are able to check analytics or, quantitative research, metrics, that's things, that would be great as a designer because they are practical. They are what we often refer to tactical research. It's something companies value a lot as well. When they look at your portfolio, they're probably going to see, metrics and all of these things that, okay, this actually worked with real people, like you mentioned, real users. It's not easy to find real users, but if you get the chance to test with real users, that's super valuable. So that's something you should not skip. You should not design something and, hey, this is the best design in the world. I want to actually see how did people use this design. In my opinion, that would be the focus for a designer, a generalist designer. So not as much the whole discovery, exploratory phase, but mostly when you have the product, how do you test it? How do you improve based on that?
Okay, and would it be a good idea for them to actually focus a little bit more on user sourcing for their like baby research? Say that, of course, they're gonna interview 5 people and it's not enough, but if they do interview those 5 people, should they be more focused on kind of making sure that these are the people that are at least really close to potentially being a user of such product, or just interview their family and kind of get it over with? Because like one example that I had come up many times is people talking about redesigning a Starbucks app and then going to the actual Starbucks and trying to harass people drinking their coffee a little bit and ask them some questions. Would
I like
that
that.
be like a more, let's say, positive attitude or approach?
No, definitely, definitely. It's very important, even if you're not a pro researcher, it's very important that you know how to target your potential users or the people you want to do that research study about. For example, something I ask a lot to junior designers, and most of them cannot answer this, is, for example, okay, you interview 5 people, that's fine, but why 5 people and why those specific people? Because sometimes you can get insights from 5 people, but they can't be 5 random people like your family, your friend. They could be your friends potentially, I mean, not ideally, but I need to know what is the criteria looking for, because obviously you can and you should do qualitative research, but you don't have real users yet. No one is using your app because your app doesn't exist yet. So what is the criteria looking for? And some people tell me, imagine they are looking for a fitness app, for example, they are looking for something about fitness, and they say, oh yeah, I want to actually interview everyone that does exercise. And then they come up with some conclusions like everyone who does exercise has this problem. And most of the time you look at the research and the research is quite leading. It's just kind of validating what they thought already. It's like, oh yeah, I had this idea, people confirmed is right, my mom said it's right. So it's just not going to be realistic. What I really want to hear is, yes, you interview 5 people, but actually you had specific characteristics. For example, you were interviewing people, I don't know, maybe you had a quantifiable measure. Maybe you said everyone that goes 3 times to the gym for some reason, because that's how you align with stakeholders. Someone who in the last survey, in terms of attitude, they say they were out of 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, they were demotivated, actually have a structure there. And then I don't care if you actually did that research. Did you actually go to the gym and talk to these people? Well, I don't care. But if you actually explain to me how you would do it, and that and that I'm aware that for me, that's important, because most of the time what I see is, okay, I have this idea, I'm going to talk to people, and basically most of the time you're asking people, hey, you really need to solve this problem, right? Don't you? And that's pretty much what you get from research. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way to go around things, because we know in design there's not one way to do things. But I really want to understand that you can understand the basics, like understand research, how research works, and really be open in the end. So answering a question, that's a much better way, being in the context, actually trying to explore your users. But I'm mostly interested to know, can you do it? Do you understand the process, rather than this is what I think, because I don't want, in my company, imagine I'm having a company, I don't want you to also bring your bias or use research to just validate your bias. I want you to surprise me, show me insights. Yeah.
Okay, because I got the impression that, of course, that there is this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in most of those research studies. So people come with a thesis or an idea that they want to test or check, and then they kind of do everything they can, kind of even subconsciously, to validate that, thinking that if they write a case study saying that, oh, I had this idea and most users said they don't need it, then it's not going to be good research. So if somebody does that, they're gonna just completely obliterate their own idea in their case study. I had an idea and it turned out to be stupid. Would that be good research?
Perfect. I love to see more of that. I love to see more of that, because you had this idea, and that's already a bit more further down the process, which is even more important for designers. It's when they already know the problem. Okay, let's solve this problem. And then they get to a stage that they do, for example, concept testing. Let's show this idea to people. But sometimes the way they do, it's like, obviously people are going to say, oh yeah, this is a great idea, but they don't understand all of the difference involved. Like, people look at an idea, are they actually going to use it, and really understand these nuances. So if they actually understand that perhaps this is not going to be a perfect idea, or perhaps this idea needs some tweaking, or even seeing the mistakes, that people are so afraid of showing mistakes in a portfolio, showing how something evolved. Like, I start like this and this sucked, and that's okay, because later down I actually iterated, and this is the final result. And obviously this is all, I know this is super long. Again, we are talking more specifically about the research process. I'd love to see more of these things, but that doesn't stop from the fact that you still need to have your final outcome. Even as a researcher, when you're showing your portfolio, people want to see, okay, you did research, but how did your research impact the real product? Even if your product was designed by someone else, you want to have a nicely designed product, because that's just professional. It shows that, okay, this is a a real product, or you don't want to just see something very badly designed and then, hey, I did my research and this is the result. So it's everything is connected.
Okay, so another question that I have that I find really interesting is that many researchers or designers that are more oriented towards research than the visual, and not just UI, visual like in general, think that the merit of their work is way more important than the way they present it. And do you think that if somebody has good UI skills, not even wanting to do interfaces, but has good visual skills to be able to make that research case study nice with beautiful graphs, beautiful quotes from people done in a nice visual way, is that a skill that you think is worth having as a researcher? And maybe that would convince some researchers to invest their time a little bit in the presentation of their idea, not just kind of writing this, term paper case study.
I think presentation matters. Presentation, storytelling, it's very important when it comes to research, because, and it is even, in day-to-day work, because, people usually have, these reports, and then they realize we actually need different types of reports for different audiences. And we do this, on a daily basis. My job is actually research operations, so we do that a lot. We need to really understand the audience and what we're trying to achieve. So, if someone shows me, just a pretty case study, research is presented in a nice way, obviously, that's not going to detract from the fact, if the research is, in a way that I find, it lacks some of the foundations or some of the skills, that's, going to still have the same issue. But if you can do them, both, like if you have good research, if you can present well, that's bonus points, definitely. I think it's very important that you're able to present in a way that really speaks to your audience, and no one wants to read like a long essay or anything like that. So.
Yeah, because there's this LDR effect where you see a long stream of text and you're like, oh no, I don't want to read that. Yeah, so what I'm kind of aiming at here is that those visual skills are, especially in this industry, are kind of important on all sides. Even if you don't want to do interfaces, it has proven, and I have an example from quite recently. I was judging one of the judges for like a nationwide contest of digital products here in Poland. And we had two categories. One was design and develop, and the other one was more research oriented. And I realized that those research oriented ones, when they had a nice presentation, they on average got more points. And that's kind of like, of course, that's like a small group of people reviewing and a small number of projects, but it was more of a pleasure for me to read through them and read more of them than read those super long ones that look kind of boring and very like scientific. So basically it creates sort of unconscious bias against those not well designed ones. And of course there are people who can get around that, but I can't. If I see something that looks nice and is just fun to go through, then I'm just gonna put more time and attention into reading that. So that can reflect on how successful that person or that project can be.
I agree completely. And I think there's visual storytelling as well. I mean, you need to be able, and obviously we're talking about myself, you, we know the process, we are familiar with the design process, but sometimes the first person that is going to look at those portfolios, it can be anyone, it can be a recruiter, it can be the hiring manager. But what they're going to see first, they're going to have a checklist, that's the truth, of skills that they're looking for, and one of them is going to be something about design. So if they're going to see a design that is not professional, it doesn't look good, next. And and then you might be losing an opportunity there. So
okay, yeah, so that's something I wanted to confirm, because I'm really trying to kind of show researchers and designers that they don't have to be natural enemies. And for designers, knowing research is kind of considered to be obvious. Like, okay, yeah, designers, to be good, they need to know research. But then for researchers, on the other hand, it's sometimes like, no, you don't need to know any design. You need to have any visual skills. You'll be fine with just your mighty brain and the statistic thinking ways and stuff like that. But in reality, it's all kind of mixed and matched together. And having a little bit of that secondary skill is also really useful. But then I have another question that's basically even more interesting to me, I guess, than I was hearing from juniors, because I started many years ago, and of course UX as a term kind of started emerging into popularity around 2007, 8, 9. But before then, companies, when I started like my first job in 2001, there were no UX researchers at the company. It was a startup. It exists to this day. It does quite well without proper UX researchers. But of course, they did have researchers, and they were considered to be called like market researchers. So people who are looking at like, the sort of what the competition does and what is the possible growth for that app, what features should they consider. And in a way, that kind of moved to be a toolkit of UX researchers right now. So is it still like exactly like that, or are there still like market research or marketing slash researchers that is a separate role from UX researchers and that handle more of that high level research stuff?
Yeah, that's a great discussion. We also have sometimes this discussion. I think, market research and UX research, they do have some overlapping. And they both can use, for example, quantitative and qualitative methods, even though UX research is a bit more targeted. I think the main difference in terms of UX research is UX research only exists within the context of a product, and market research, and that's why I usually don't like those case studies that start completely from scratch, because if you are starting from scratch, you need market research. You can't start, it's like, building your own startup. You can't just, I have an idea, I'm going to just, put this out there. And that's when actually you need market research. And sometimes I think there's also this confusion in the beginning, like when you try to speak to people, you actually are not trying to understand your users, which understanding your users, a sample of 5 people might be enough to gather some themes, some emerging patterns, like we call it. But if you're actually doing market research, you need a bigger sample because you need to understand market behaviors. So I think that's a big confusion as well. They should actually work together. And, there are especially parts of research that are going to be much more specific of UX later, in the product stage. But especially in the beginning, there's this big confusion because in the beginning of a project, you think, I already did market research, so why do I need UX research? And, the answer has to be mostly, in UX research, we focus mostly about the behaviors a potential user has within that context. So it's a very specific product context. So short answer is we need both. I do think we need both. I think, market research, it's, there's definitely some topics that should be covered by market research, like pricing, the demand, all of that segments, specific marketing segments should come from market. But that information can then be used for UX researchers, by UX researchers, to actually continue and focusing more on the context of the product, like how does this exist within our product and how can we make our product better and better. So it just kind of allows you, when you do competitive analysis, you are seeing something that already is out there. But when you do UX research and you're able to do it in the context of your product, you're kind of able to predict unmet needs. So if you really understand your users, and that's a massive advantage. It doesn't mean you can't have a product without UX research, but that's a massive advantage that we often, we just come back, with the whole agile mindset. Sometimes we build and then we go back. And sometimes we need to do it, but I also think, we can make more and more use, of UX research. But it's definitely a new term. I do think, all of us do a little bit of UX research, but they're just different roles for those activities, I would say.
Okay, because I have this sort of, let's say, confusion going on, and that has been for a while, that many people say that UX researcher, or basically maybe like a very skilled UX designer with strong research skills, can be a person that kills a product before it happens because they find out it's useless or not needed. But of course, if it comes from the users and they test it on like a very large group and they figure out that people don't need that product, then fine. But if it comes from like general market movements, so recession, inflation, some sort of decreased spending in people, then this is basically more towards the market research, and then that person actually kills the product. So is it like really that important for especially juniors trying to get into the industry to feel that their role is going to be all the way from deciding the fate whether this should exist to testing maybe a drop-down list versus an action sheet on like an A/B test with users? So like from very high level, let's not make this anymore, like completely, to let's maybe tweak this button.
Okay, this is a difficult question. It's a very good topic.
Move like to this side more or to this side more? As juniors, people with more experience, they can kind of broaden this, but initially that can be very difficult. Like, okay, I'm gonna be researching whether people are able to go through a flow during a usability test and see if it makes sense to them. But also, I'm gonna be researching whether people even need that product at all,
In first
and
place.
that might be like really scary because these are two different things.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, you actually touched a very important point there. Like we have our users and we have our customers. And usually in B2C, obviously, our users are our customers. Sometimes they are not. And sometimes we are actually, market research is completely separated kind of in B2B because, customers actually are purchasing a product for your users. But the bottom line is UX, when UX started to be, popular and, I am one of the people who was having a UX role that didn't really feel like a UX role back then. It was more of what we call today CRO, right? Conversion rate optimization, because I was not doing UX there. And I think that's where the confusion comes from. It's like we are doing these things, but what are we testing? Sometimes are we testing, are users able to perform this action? Is it easy for them to use? But sometimes we are testing, are they clicking here? Are they buying here? So there are different things. So I think, in terms of UX, pure UX, we want to make, the life of people who use a product easier. So it should be easier for them. It should be pleasant. It should be delightful. All of these words we use. But, we don't really know if they are going to actually pay for it. And that's definitely a market thing because, for example, imagining you have a need for a product, right? And, sometimes you see these marketing campaigns being done very well. And imagine a MacBook, okay? It's like everyone has a MacBook. Okay, great. I really want a MacBook and it works really well. Now, let me try the MacBook. Now, if we imagine after we purchase a MacBook, okay, market research was great. Everyone is buying your product. But then you start using your MacBook and imagine it doesn't work or it's not pleasant to use. So what do? I mean, you're not going to continue paying for a MacBook, right? Of course, you paid once, but you're not going to continue. And I think that's the main difference here is that you don't know. I mean, you don't know, your product can be, great. It can provide a great experience for your users. It can be, in terms of usability, it can be perfect. I mean, nothing is perfect, but it can be very easy to use. But maybe your potential customers are not going to buy it. And exactly, that's how you say it comes from market research. So, me personally, I want to see, what do I want to see, that a junior designer can do? I mean, are they able to focus on the user needs, because obviously you need to show me that you can also connect them with the business goals. But for me in UX, and, this is subjective and I know some people think differently, but for me, UX is about the users. So yes, I have to take into consideration the business goals, but ultimately my job is to make the user's life easier. So that's what I think those two things separate.
So would that be the main focus for juniors entering the industry, to make the users' lives easier and not worry about like the very broad spectrum of possible research?
I mean, yes, but obviously you need to show that you care about the business goals. I know, because I'm not going to be blind to the fact that a manager is going to look at your portfolio and they want to know, okay, you care about the business goals. Where are the business goals? I'm, needing to be realistic, as I said, you need to speak to your audience. So you need to know who your audience is. But ultimately, exactly, it's UX. So the whole point of UX, and I think that's why we don't get as much investment in UX, it's a long-term game. So if you're actually able, and you're not always able to do it, there are so many talented UX designers that are hired to do a job that they need to convince others to let them do their job. And I think that's why ultimately we have so many terrible products in the end. But you do have like, is your responsibility. I think it's everyone's responsibility. We need to show that we really have users' interests, first, and that's what we care about. And it's also the type of job you attract, right? I mean, even sometimes I get these questions as well. I mean, should I, focus about the business goal? How do I know this product is going to work? How do I know? I mean, you don't know. This is a fictional project. You're never going to know. What you can do is you can show that you have the skills needed, to work on a product, and you should show your values and principles as well, because it will attract the right job for you. I mean, if you are, showing that you don't care about users, you only show about conversion rates. I mean, that's what, the type of job you're going to attract. So, attract a job that you feel passionate about, that aligns with your values and principles as well. That's my, philosophy.
Okay, and then showing skills, because this is something that we touched on before, but I want to kind of touch on it again, maybe from a different angle this time. So obviously, when you're doing research for a case study, you're not really showing skills. You're showing that you learned a step-by-step kind of way of approaching something. And then the actual skills come from potentially like real research on real people with all the unpredictable things that can happen with that. So are they really skills, or is it more of like learning some patterns for those juniors to follow?
Good point. I think it's like, theory versus practice. I think you only really learn something when you have both. So I'm not, just practice approach, just go out there, apply. Some people say I have years of experience, but then, sometimes it means years doing the wrong thing. So, it's wrong. I be careful with the word wrong, but, it's, things that can be better, because you need to know, you need to study as well, like know who did this, who did what, and what is my stance and things. So I think that's important. But on the other hand, you can't just read the book and then, if you're not applying, you don't learn. So I think you need both. I think you need theory and practice. Now, the thing about practice and experience, and I see this in a lot of job roles, 2 years of experience, 3 years of experience. But how can students have experience if they just finished, a degree, or if they just finished, a boot camp or course, whatever it is? So it's very tricky, and it really depends on what I'm looking for. Because if I'm looking for a junior designer, I have to be realistic. This person might not have experience, so I'm actually going to see how they were able to apply within, that fictional environment. But if I were a junior right now, I would try my best to actually try to do that in real setting. Real world projects in a portfolio are so valuable. Pro bono, I know no one wants to work for free. Do it for a cause you're passionate about, a non-profit cause, something you're passionate about. They are so valuable.
Yeah, and also it's kind of like nobody wants to work for free, but at the same time, when they're at this stage, their work doesn't really contribute much unless they have like a super bright idea, but then almost nobody will listen to them because they don't have the experience. So that's kind of like a loop that's really difficult. But yeah, so maybe in closing, because I think we went through like a couple of really interesting things. So still thinking from the junior perspective, because these are the people that I want to help the most. They should understand that research is an important part of design, but at the same time, they don't need to necessarily always follow the entire process and start from the perspective that their kind of fake research on a pretend project is going to be exactly the same way as the real research that happens in the real world.
Yeah, agree completely. And, and also, be open to different ways of doing things, and, don't be afraid to show us your own mistakes and, how it evolved. So yeah, definitely.
And then maybe should we kind of also give a little bit of light to the fact that the typical patterns of doing research from courses and boot camps can then drastically shift even between specific companies. That can be like, there's like this step-by-step guide. If you do this, you do that, and then like just step-by-step, check. But then you go into the company and you realize that it's all on its head. It's like a completely different approach, usually much faster, because obviously companies just want to get results faster and cheaper. but like, how can we get those juniors to know that it's not necessarily going to look exactly like in their case study in the real world?
Yes, that's a good point. It's never going to look like the step by step in the course, like never. I think it helps, that, as a junior designer, you understand, the typical design process and the different frameworks and, different schools of thoughts, all of that, like explore, read a lot, experiment yourself. But ultimately, and I think those things are just when you start experiencing them, they are not going to be linear at all. So, maybe start another project that you don't. And I noticed this a lot when a student that they already did, from scratch project, a step by step. And then I tell them, now do something completely different. You have this brief, tell me how you would approach. And they get stuck because they're like, okay, step one, I'm going to interviews. I mean, but why? Why are you going to interview? How much time do you have? Oh, I only have, I don't know, 2 weeks. Well, can you do that? Or can you do something else? Trying to understand these constraints and, practice on different types of projects. Don't just do a million from scratch projects in your portfolio. So
Yeah, so also thinking on your feet, like
yeah,
you have to deliver some sort of information so the entire project can move forward, and you have a limited time frame for it. So what will you pick from your toolkit and what will you remove? And
totally.
understanding that, because I still feel that there is this understanding among juniors that every time they're asked to do research once they get to a job, it's gonna be the same process over and over every single time. And it's as I said, it's not as linear. It's always adjusted to the particular needs, and in some cases some parts of that research were already done before, so those parts are, let's say, known for now, not a priority. And I think it's really good to understand that it's kind of like um, that you learn these different skills. Well, let's say even making personas, but then you might never even use them.
Yeah.
But just to kind of your portfolio is to show that you know that these different research techniques exist, and that and even more than that, because of course everybody can just list research techniques. So even more than that would be to show that you know which technique to use in which scenario.
Exactly. And if you have more than one project, for example, imagine you show personas in one project. And by the way, a tip about personas, even if it's a fictional project for everyone, please use your personas throughout the project, because sometimes I see a persona there and I never see the persona mentioned ever again in the project. It's like, okay, here's a persona. Like, what did you do with the persona? I mean, you did and then they did user flows or something else, and persona is gone. I mean, what was it for? So at least mention the persona, in order to help persona, whatever, because that's the purpose of the persona, is to kind of help you to communicate something. So if it helps you communicate something and you can do that, amazing, great, the persona serve the purpose. But show, even in a fictional project, I want to see that. But on the next project, maybe don't use personas. Maybe, depending on your brief, depending on your constraints, depending on the project, maybe we didn't have time to do personas, or it was not something that, stakeholders actually related to. But we did a quick empathy map and it worked really well to align our team, for example. Or maybe we didn't even do an empathy map, but we did a quick presentation of our findings and that worked really well. So I actually want to see, I don't want to see 3 projects with exact the same, because that's just, that doesn't tell me much. So I think that's another thing they can do. They can have projects going through different ways through the process. The toolkit, like you say.
So they could have like, let's say, even if they really like want to do that super long one,
Mhm.
and they have, let's say, 3 case studies, they don't really need to make them all follow the exact same steps every single time. Some of
Exactly.
them can be much, much shorter, more to the point, or even focusing on just a little piece of this entire puzzle, not the entire path from start to finish.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not like if you put them like all 3 side by side, it's just kind of the same length exactly.
Exactly.
Okay. So maybe just kind of wrapping up, what would be the advice that you could give for juniors that are trying to make sense of all of it? Like how much research, what to really focus on, how to choose their path?
Okay, so if you want to become a UX designer in a generalist role, so these are some tips, general tips, and obviously from my experience, and everyone is going to have a different opinion. But to really stand out, you need first to attract the attention of people who look at your portfolio. And usually those people are not, designers. I mean, sometimes you might get designers, but many times you're going to get recruiters and people who don't even have an understanding of the process. So you really want to attract attention with nice visuals. That's the first thing. So you want to make sure you show the outcome, okay? You're going to see senior portfolios that show big brands, Google, Amazon, and that's great because, they work with those brands. They have something else in a portfolio. They have what we call track record, but you don't because you're a junior designer. So you want to show the outcomes. So show those, flashing, outcomes, mock-ups. We want to see them, because that's the outcome. So that's the first thing you show. Then once you capture the attention, then yes, I want to know about your process, but your process should not be the same every time you have a project. So you need to show that you can actually have different types of projects and different approaches depending on the problem, depending on the constraints, and bonus points if you are able to work in a real project, even if it's 1 month project. Pro bono project, startup. If you don't want to work for free, do it for a nonprofit cause that you're passionate about, like volunteer for something that you can actually contribute and make a change. And lastly, remember that obviously, everything that you put out there, the skills you're going to show, it's very important that you show, the skills you want to highlight. Like I mentioned in the beginning, like if you want to attract a certain type of company, it's also important that you highlight those principles, the values, what, you want to do. For me, it's very important. I am focusing on the users, and my job, my mission is really to make users' lives better. And that's the type of company I want to attract as well. So obviously you need to consider business goals as well, but always keep in mind what you want to attract. I think that's pretty much, some, don't worry about the projects being different lengths. And I get this a lot as well. Oh, but this project is so short compared to the other one. That's great. They were different projects. Sometimes you don't even need a full, from the beginning to the start project. Sometimes it's just a specific feature that you were working on. And that's great. That shows me, a different case study, a different project. So don't be afraid of having projects, case studies. Ones are shorter, longer. That doesn't really matter. I think, from my experience, that's pretty much what I would say. You really need to think about the people who actually go to your portfolio, visit your portfolio, because you are going to have different people looking at your portfolio at different stages. So you can't just think on, that designer that knows a lot about UX and they're going to be wow about your process, but you also need to understand, the first person landing in your portfolio, they're going to have like a checklist and they're going to look at your work. It doesn't look professional enough or it doesn't look good enough. That's the first thing, and you might lose opportunities. So yeah, visual skills are important. I think everything that has to do UX design, if you want to be a UX designer, you need to know how to design. You don't need to be an expert at everything because you're just getting started. But I would personally also highlight my design skills if I was getting started today. So
especially as a designer, because really, like, it's been a plague some time ago with like a lot of designers who don't do any design and they're mostly talking at meetings. And I had a sort of, let's say, pleasure of working with a couple, and some of them managed to slide through meetings for a year and a half before they had to actually design something, and it turned out they had no idea what they're doing and they got fired.
wow.
So this is kind of like some people can even trick their way into the industry that way. But yeah, okay. So that's a lot of eye-opening and a little bit of confirming of what I was actually also thinking. So let's say that my research is also like a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. Very much for this, because it's always good to see the perspective from somebody who's more into the other path. I'm mostly a designer. I started as a designer. I've been a designer most of the time, and I'm doing, of course, bits of research, but I'm not primarily a researcher. So it's always good to hear the story from, let's say, the other side, and just to kind of see, because the ultimate goal is to kind of guide the juniors so they can get to their first job and then learn both research and design and be better and hopefully change their lives and the lives of their users for the better. This should be our goal, not gatekeeping and just kind of letting people in, guiding them, and telling them it's going to be okay. They don't need to be doing those super complicated term papers necessarily. Just show that they understand the premise between design, test, repeat, and kind of the circle of design life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree so much with that. And everyone starts somewhere. So, we shouldn't expect someone getting started to know everything. I really have strong feelings against, gatekeeping, and, it's definitely, you need to start somewhere. So, yeah.
All right. Awesome. So thank you so much for that. And I'm gonna link your social medias in the description of the video later on as well. So if people want to see what you do and how you can also mentor or help them, all the links will be in the description. Thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. And to all our viewers, as always, have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much.